The Jackbox Naughty Pack is rated M. It contains mature themes and explicit content. I'm not gonna bother with censoring most of the explicit gameplay. Viewer discretion is advised. The Jackbox Naughty Pack has a 29% review score on Steam, the lowest review score a Jackbox Party Pack has ever received to date. What happened here? As a response to the 2023 installment of the annual Jackbox Customer Feedback Survey, Jackbox created a pack of 3 after-dark mature party games aiming to listen to the feedback received by many of us in 2023. Introducing the Jackbox Naughty Pack, featuring a long-awaited sequel to Fakin It All Night Long, a new Drawful spin-off, Dirty Drawful, and an all-new presentation game, Let Me Finish, complete with raunchy prompts, titillating visuals, no family-friendly mode, and Schrodinger's The. But now that it's out, people suddenly don't want to come near this game. A pack idea that so many people were begging Jackbox to create, yet on release seems to be repelling its own target audience as if Jackbox betrayed them. So, what do I think? What does this pack have to offer? How does the naughty theming of this pack translate into a mature Jackbox experience? And is a 29% review score on Steam really justified? Well, to answer that last question, no, I don't think so. As for why I think that, and to answer the other 2 questions, I need to let you all know what I think of each game in the Jackbox Naughty Pack and the quality of the pack as a whole. So, as a religious virgin that isn't exactly the target audience of this pack, allow me to engage in arguably one of the most generic video formulas for this franchise that I've ever engaged with as I express my honest thoughts on the Jackbox Naughty Pack. Now, before we get into Fakin It All Night Long, I feel like it's important to bring up my distaste for the original Fakin It in the Jackbox Party Pack 3. In the past, I've made it very clear on my channel that it is easily my least favorite Jackbox social deduction game in the franchise, even beating out Hit Notorious, the game most people associate me with for my disappointment at its scoring system. In my Q&A readout, I called Fakin It my least favorite Jackbox game from a subjective standpoint, and in my tier list livestream, I put it in F tier. But before the Jackbox Naughty Pack released, I wanted to make an effort to give the original a second chance and play with my flatmates to see if my critique still held up. And I am willing to admit that the original Fakin It is not as bad as I previously stated, but its ranking has only been promoted from F tier to D tier, and the game's reception from my flatmates wasn't too great either. After this game with my flatmates though, I finally figured out exactly why I hate being the faker in this game in particular, as opposed to being the odd one out in any other social deduction game. And it all comes down to this. A large majority of the prompts in the original Fakin It ask the players about real-life experiences they've had based on cold hard fact, but these prompts actively shoot the faker in the foot when the restrictive limitations of the game only make it feasible to play with close friends and family in real life, making deception about real-life experiences with these people next to impossible. So why do I bring any of this up in the first place? Well, it's because I think that the naughty theme of this latest installment of Fakin It is one of the main reasons this game brought Fakin It from a D tier to a solid A tier. So, without further ado, let's spend some time talking about Fakin It All Night Long. So, Fakin It All Night Long. We are now one sequel game away from making the Jackbox Party Pack 3 completely obsolete. In Fakin It All Night Long, one randomly chosen person gets to pick a category that will determine how everyone will answer questions. Then everyone gets a secret task which they must answer in a certain way that reflects their truth, except for one player who either gets a vague hint or absolutely nothing. That player is the faker, randomly chosen at the start of a round. The faker has to submit an answer as well, they just won't know what the real prompt was until later. Then everyone's answers are revealed and the prompt is revealed to everyone. Now everyone has to discuss their answers and work together to accuse who they believe the faker is, while the faker does everything they can to not get caught. If you can't form a majority, the faker is still on the loose, but if the majority accuses one person, everyone gets to learn whether they're the faker or not. If they are the faker is caught and they lose the round. If you instead accuse an innocent player, they... Oh my. Damn it! As I was saying, if the majority accuses an innocent player, they flash you and then a new secret task is divvied out to all the non-fakers. And this process continues until either the faker is correctly accused or the faker gets past 3 secret tasks without getting caught, or 2 secret tasks in 3-player games. Regular players earn points for guessing the faker and some bonus points for doing so consecutively, while the faker earns points for every task they blend in without getting accused by the majority. Scores are divvied out, a new faker is selected, and the whole process happens again another 2 or 3 times before the final round text you up. Around round where everyone submits 3 text-based answers to 3 separate questions, while the faker gets slightly different questions to answer and doesn't know they're the faker until they submit all their answers. One by one, each secret task is revealed for discussion like normal, but in this round, no accusations can be made until the final question. The scores are tallied and all the losing players get flashed by the winner. Okay, so that all sounds rather similar to the original Fakin It, so what's new? Well, by far the biggest addition to this version of Fakin It is the brand new remote playstyle, and holy shit, this feature alone brings this game up like 2 whole tiers. That's right, this game can now be played remotely. In the game's menu, you can now choose whether to play the same room mode or the remote mode. Same room mode plays out like you'd expect from the original game, where everyone gets their prompt privately and then everyone performs their action in time with an on-screen countdown. Only after all that does the secret task get revealed to everyone. Remote mode, however, works a little differently. Rather than submitting your state of readiness on your device for each task, you'll instead be tasked to submit a digital equivalent of your response, which will then be revealed shortly after the secret task is revealed to everyone. This goes for every category in the game. And speaking of categories, what are they? Starting with the returning categories, Hands of Truth, where you raise your hand, or not, depending on the question, You Got a Point, which involves pointing at a player in the game, Number Pressure, renamed to Finger Blast in the sequel, where you raise a number of fingers, usually ranging from 0 to 5, or in this version you can flip the middle finger if you really want to, and Text You Up, the final round category where everyone writes 3 text-based answers with a few key differences I mentioned earlier. However, there's also 2 all-new categories as well. Face value from the original Fakin It is dead, and it was killed by the all-new, far superior emotional damage, where players submit an emoji related to the task, while the faker gets a vague hint as to what the category of emoji they should submit. And finally, Thumb Shot, a unique rapid-fire round where a subcategory is randomly selected and all the regular players receive 3 items on their devices. For each one, all players must either put their thumbs up or down depending on the item's relation to the subcategory. Once all 3 items are revealed, everyone gets one and only one chance to catch the faker. Messing it up here means throwing the entire round. Okay, so now that you're caught up on all the main features of the game, what do I think of the sequel? Well, I think it's leagues better than the original in pretty much every way possible. But why is that? Well, I'll get into the little details later, but the 2 main reasons that this version is superior are the new playstyles and, in a super roundabout way, the prompts. Now, one of the main reasons I despised the original Fakin It was related to this countdown and holding period. Since everyone has to answer using a physical method in this mode, everyone's answers, including the fakers, are revealed to everyone and stay revealed for a large chunk of time before the faker even gets to see what the prompt is, and by extension what they're defending. The reason I never enjoyed this method of answer revealing was because it doesn't give the faker any insurance. For comparison, if we look at Push the Button for example, if an alien answers a prompt with other humans, once everyone's done, the prompt will be read out to everyone, and then shortly after, everyone's responses get shown on screen. This way, aliens have around 4 seconds or so to start coming up with the start of a defense for the answer before everyone sees it. Whether this be defending an opinion you don't support or blaming your ability to accurately answer the prompt. And if all else fails, you can always say, I got hacked. All this to say, while the aliens are disadvantaged, they aren't exactly dealt a bad hand. Not in same room Fakin It, however. The best you can do there is either copy someone else and hope it works out, or commit to an action and hope the gamble pays off. And if it doesn't work out, the faker has to sit there being silently judged for what feels like an eternity without any method of defense. And I didn't think it would be possible, but they somehow made the countdown and holding period longer? Like, seriously? Let me bring out the timer.
The task was, raise your hand if you played a sport in high school.
But despite the complaining I've done about this same room mode, I'm a lot more accustomed to it here than in the original just because of how the prompts are handled in this one. But I'll get to that. But first, let me praise the genius that is remote mode. Firstly, why remote mode is better for the faker. Since this mode requires everyone to submit their responses privately, the prompt ends up getting revealed to everyone before everyone gets to see each other's answers, and the amount of insurance this gives the faker is unreal. Not only does this mean that the faker has a split second to start coming up with a defense to their response, but they also aren't burdened by the possibility of being super suspicious for a full 11 seconds without any opportunity to justify their response. It puts the faker and the regular players on a lot more even of a playing field. But this remote mode doesn't just benefit the faker alone. The regular players are also benefited by this mode due to everyone's responses being placed persistently on the secret task screen and staying there until the timer runs out. This way, players don't have to try and remember what everyone else submitted like they would in same room mode. They can just look at the game screen and everything they need to know is there. This way, it's also also a lot harder for the faker to gaslight the other players about what action they performed, in case that's a strategy people have tried, because everyone's answers are almost always on the screen. So if gaslighting isn't your thing, this is also a good reason to switch to remote mode. Hell, the higher the player count, the more of a luxury this mode becomes. And finally, why this mode benefits everyone. It's just plain faster. Because everyone submits their answers on their devices, the countdown and holding period no longer serve a purpose, and as a result are completely skipped. And considering these take around 12 seconds per secret task, that's easily over a minute of time being saved each game with remote mode. All of this to say, remote mode is a fantastic improvement on the Fakin It formula. And hot take incoming, I prefer to play remote mode over same room mode in real life, for all the reasons I just mentioned. That's not to say that there isn't any benefit to playing same room mode, however. There are still a couple reasons to play Fakin It in same room mode, the way God would probably intend if this version of Fakin It wasn't so horny. For starters, as much as it confuses me, there are still probably people out there that prefer to play same room mode for some physical and psychological failsafes available to the faker in that mode. For starters, instead of effectively throwing darts as the faker in remote mode and just hoping you can defend your answer, in same room mode the faker can see everyone respond to the prompt physically, and if they're quick enough and not giving away any physical or social signs of suspicion, they can get away with copying another player's answer, and then hoping it works out. And with higher player counts, there is promise in the strategy of gaslighting players about what people answered as a faker, because if the only real opportunity people have to see everyone's answers is in a short time frame of 11 seconds, naturally people are going to forget a few responses, and that could be taken advantage of in high player games. Then again, I've never tried this strategy, so for all you know I could be setting you up for failure. But there's also an objectively cooler incentive to playing same room mode, and that is access to the prompts exclusive to the same room mode. These prompts will typically involve interacting with the physicality of the players or the room itself, or get you to perform your actions in a creative way. Or even something like this.
Fuck fingers, show me those elbows.
So if you know your players well and are a bit dramatic, same room mode might be worth it for some of these prompts alone. Oh, and here's a hint, most of these same room prompts are present in Finger Blast, and you got a point. So yeah, those are the different play modes. Each one has their place and their niches, but if you ask me, remote mode is the way to go in most scenarios, and it's one of the main reasons that this Fakin It sequel has been carried as hard as it has. So now that we've gotten the play modes out of the way, let's talk about a topic that is this game's biggest issue, but also in a roundabout way, this game's biggest strength, and that is the prompts. Obviously, due to the gimmick of being part of the Jackbox Naughty Pack, it should come to no surprise that some of the prompts in this game are going to be super raunchy and sometimes just batshit insane. Hell, some of them have the balls to use the C word without hiring an Australian voice actor. But out of every game in this pack, this game suffers the most from the target audience gap that this pack creates. We'll get to these games later, but Dirty Drawful really just expects you to know a small amount of terminology and slang to draw prompts accurately, and even then there's a feature in that game that can often get you out of drawing something you don't know the definition of. Let Me Finish also really just requires you to know some naughty terminology and have an open mind. In Fakin It All Night Long, however, due to the nature of this game, there are gonna be prompts that ask you to recall personal experiences, and with a naughty coat of paint, Fakin It All Night Long, to an extent, expects that the people playing this game will be sexually active, or at the least have a slew of sexual encounters under their belt. Now, here's the problem I have with that. I'm a virgin, and I also don't have a ton of desire to be sexually adventurous both until marriage or outside of marriage. That's just how I roll. And if I'm not mistaken, almost every other person I've played this pack with so far is also a virgin. So if we end up rolling a personal experience prompt about sexual encounters, everyone's answers are going to be mostly looking the same. But apart from this little target audience blunder, the nature of the prompts in this version is generally much better, and the fact that they're naughty ironically makes me more comfortable playing this version of Fakin It than the original. And it all comes down to this one thing. This version of Fakin It is more opinionated than ever. You see, the reason I wasn't super into playing the original Fakin It was because most of the prompts in that version ask you to recall personal experiences. Not only that, but these experiences tend to be memorable. Now, because the limitations of the original Fakin It only really made it possible to play with close friends and family unless you use a finicky Discord workaround, it's way easier to get backed into a corner as a faker. Simply because the game expects you to play with close friends and family, yet only asks you about basic experiences that your player base is bound to know anyway. And because the original Fakin It is more for general audiences, rolling a non-family friendly prompt and then getting backed into a corner with it in the original is an experience that sticks out way more and is infinitely more embarrassing and uncomfortable in the moment, making lying in that version so much harder than it has any right to be. Hell, it can get a religious man to say that they hate the Bible. But Fakin It All Night Long does two things with its prompt writing that makes it easier to lie about and more hilarious to interrogate. One, it's a lot more opinionated. Opinions, by nature, aren't fact, no matter how hard Twitter will try to convince you otherwise. But because so many more of the prompts are opinionated, both coming up with lies for these prompts and interrogating the other players for their responses is a lot more enjoyable. Because while it may go against what you personally believe or find enjoyable, you're not actively contradicting cold hard facts. You just have to tightrope these fabrications with your pre-established personality. And believe me, I much prefer lying about why I would eat my own eggs if I laid my own eggs, instead of lying about why I'm the person with the worst memory because I totally forgot the prompt immediately after I read it. That's just subjectively way easier and objectively way more interesting. And now the second thing that makes these prompts more enjoyable to work with. I've mentioned it multiple times already, but the prompts are raunchier, more intense, more graphic, more intimate. Opinionated prompts are one thing, but the more secretive nature of these prompts allow for a lot more critical analysis of the darker sides of the personalities of your fellow players. The stuff that isn't your ego or your superego, the stuff you'd normally show people, it's an analysis of the id. At least it is if you're like me and have only played this pack with several groups of virgins. But even then, you're still bound to see a fair amount of physically based prompts, many of which won't apply to a virgin at all, which again makes up my entire player pool for this game. But to be honest, I don't care as much about that. And in an ironic twist, it's because I play with virgins. I've played this game with 4 different groups, of which I know from 4 wildly different settings. And I can't confirm anything with my online groups, but the one thing that united all of my fellow players was our virginity. So whenever we rolled a prompt that would ask us to recall a sexual experience we had, there was no pressure to lie about our sexual activity as fakers, because any answer that didn't support the narrative of "I'm a virgin" would immediately be voted out anyways without fail. In turn, this does make this minority of prompts rather pointless to my player base, but if there's anything I don't want to lie about, it's sexual activity that I would be having, as being sexually adventurous isn't something that's protected by my morals as a religious man. But the mature target audience of this game, and the fact that I only play this game with virgins, takes all the pressure off of what would be an incredibly intimidating set of prompts. And that's why I like this game's prompts exponentially more than the originals, because there's a much higher batch of opinion-based prompts that are actually defendable as a faker. Said opinion prompts are sometimes personal and require personality analysis to properly deduce, and with the right group of people, there is almost zero pressure that comes with answering a real-life experience prompt incorrectly. But before I close my thoughts on this game, I'd just like to brief a few more specific things that I didn't get to that also significantly shape my opinion on this game. Something I feel is really important to point out with this version of Fakin It is the kind of prompts you'll be seeing for each category. As I've already established, the opinionated prompts are the ones you'll be wanting to see more, as these ones tend to alienate the player base way less often. From what I've noticed, prompts that ask you about physical sexual experiences you've had tend to populate most in categories Finger Blast and Hands of Truth. So if you're a virgin like me, or are just sexually responsible, then you won't be getting as much mileage out of these categories. Then, continuing from least opinionated to most opinionated, we have Finger Blast and Hands of Truth of course, then it goes You Got a Point, Thumb Shot, and Emotional Damage. And then there's also Text You Up, but in all honesty that one's a real wild card, anything can happen. And coincidentally, this list from least opinionated to most opinionated categories is also my list from least favorite to most favorite categories. So yeah, just refer to this chart if you're not exactly the intended target audience for this game. I would consider keeping it in mind. One other thing on Thumb Shot in particular, despite how much I love this category, it is really easy for the faker, and it only gets easier for the faker the more players you have. Now, I have heard people say that they've never seen the faker get caught in this one, but I can assure you it is 100% possible, and it's all because I accidentally said that I thought dropping Grandma's ashes was funny. Another tidbit on Thumb Shot, each Thumb Shot round will be based on one of 6 different subcategories, these being comedy or tragedy, feels good or feels bad, horny or not horny, sexy or not sexy, smash or pass, and finally yes or no. And while I think this variety is great, I desperately wish there was a system in place to lower the chances of subcategories repeating. Now, if the Jackbox Naughty Pack didn't get updated, this is around the time where I would give some final thoughts and finish the game review, but there is one last thing I want to bring up for this game in particular, and that has to do with the content level setting. You see, in the major content update, Fakin It All Night Long and Let Me Finish both received a new setting called Content Level. These function differently between the two games, but they both share a common purpose of adjusting what content intensities you'll mostly be seeing in their respective games. I'll leave my thoughts on its implementation in Let Me Finish a secret for now, but I personally do not like how it's implemented in Fakin It All Night Long. But how is it implemented? Well, let me walk you through it. To start off, every prompt in the game has a set intensity, which can be one of 3 options: Normie, Spicy, and XXX. Now the content level setting also has 3 options to choose from: nice, normal, and the inconveniently named spicy. What the setting does is it only allows prompts with a relating intensity to be rolled and filters out all the others from play. Content level nice only allows normie prompts, normal only allows spicy prompts, and spicy only allows XXX prompts. On paper, this sounds like a great addition, and for the most part, it is. But I have one major problem with it. The fact that the filter only allows one intensity at a time, meaning that no matter what your settings are, you're always going to be locked out of a large percentage of prompts. Now, before the content update, you were able to roll every prompt that the game would let you. Yes, there was no intensity filtering back then, but the one saving grace of this pre-patch behavior was that you knew you weren't getting locked out of any prompts. But now that the update is out, it doesn't matter what your settings are, you're always going to get locked out of a large chunk of prompts. By default, the content level setting is set to normal, which gives you access to around 56% of the available prompts. Nice gives you 31%, and spicy gives you 13%. So with the more specialized settings, you're generally going to be getting less variety. Now, as much as I don't like how this setting is handled, I have to stress that for the most part, it is a good addition. However, the main reason I bring all this up is to show you just how much of a problem a couple categories become on the spicy content level setting, specifically for thumbshot and emotional damage. There are only 9 unique thumbshot rounds with the XXX intensity, so when your content level is set to spicy, you can only play this round a maximum of 9 times before you start seeing repeats. And because of the structured nature of each thumbshot round, after you see the first item, you'll know exactly what the other items will be if you've already seen the round before. This is kind of a problem for thumbshot in general, but you don't really notice it for the most part in other content levels because there are over 100 unique thumbshot rounds for each of the other content intensities. But because of the lack of XXX thumbshot rounds, thumbshot on a spicy content level setting will eventually become trivial, and you'll have to make accusations based purely on everyone's first response. But while that's bad, it's not nearly as bad as how emotional damage is handled on a spicy content setting. When your content level is set to spicy, you can only roll up to 9 XXX emotional damage prompts, and you'd be lucky to even get past 2 full rounds without seeing a single repeat prompt. And because of how faker hints are handled in this category, due to the lack of XXX prompts, every XXX prompt in this category has a faker hint that can let the faker accurately deduce what the real prompt will be based on what they're told and when they're told. Meaning if the faker knows what faker hint correlates to each real prompt, they can confidently answer every XXX prompt in this category with 100% honesty. And I'm not just saying that, I've done it. I have footage of me playing emotional damage on the spicy content setting, and I just so happened to be the faker. Because I already knew what the hints would be due to researching for this video, I was able to answer every question with 100% honesty and confidence as a faker. I mean, you don't just pick this particular red emoji by accident, do you? I only received one suspicious vote that entire round, and I don't blame them. I had a massive advantage and I knew what the prompt would have been in every scenario, and that just baffles me. In most other categories, the faker is given almost zero help or hints as to what the prompt will be, and hints will only be given if absolutely necessary, which is why prompt memorization is the last problem I would have expected this game to have. But 9 thumbshot rounds, and especially 9 emotional damage prompts on the spicy setting is simply not enough. If the whole game focuses on the idea that one player is to be given as little information as possible, there simply should not be any scenario where the faker can correctly deduce what the real prompt is based on the absolute minimum amount of information you can give them. If the amount of XXX content and thumbshot and emotional damage is so small that the entire faker experience is trivialized when playing these rounds on a spicy content setting, then that's a major warning sign. 9 prompts is simply not enough for a game like this. Hell, this filtering discovery made me so mad that I modded in an all new content level adjacency setting that can either make the filtering more lenient or turn off filtering entirely. And this is how I choose to play Fakin It all night long. Whoa, sorry for being such a Debbie Downer there. I know I've just finished complaining a lot about the content level setting here, but in most scenarios, it's still a decent setting. I just felt it was really important to let you know about those footnotes. Now that the setting's here, you'll always be locked out of a large chunk of prompts, and if you're playing on the spicy content setting, I would heavily advise against playing thumbshot and emotional damage due to their lack of XXX content. But apart from that, the content level setting is still an alright addition, and I can confidently say that Fakin It All Night Long is the only game in this pack that was negatively affected by the content update. But apart from those things, I think I've made my points clear. Fakin It All Night Long is a fantastic sequel that blows quite literally every other aspect of the original out of the water. The remote functionality aiding in online play, Faker fairness, and pacing, the 2 new categories and updates to the other categories making them the best versions of themselves they've ever been, the prompts being on average more opinion-based, and the countless amount of quality of life additions all help to make this version of Fakin' It almost unrecognizable from the original. Hell, I'd even argue that the naughty theming and prompts of this version are the only things present in the new version that still validate the existence of the original from Pack 3. This is Tim Sniffin's second time directing a game, and he seems to have already found a niche of creating sequel games that are so much of an improvement that they give almost no reasons to go back to the original. Congrats, Mr. Sniffin, I tip my hat to you. So now that you've found your niche, please direct Survive the Internet 2 when the company eventually decides to do that. But on that note, if you're okay with the naughty prompts, this is the Fakin' It version that's just objectively better on every level. Some would say that Fakin' It walked so that All Night Long could run, but I would dare say that Fakin' It crawled so that All Night Long could sprint. The only thing getting in the way of this version is the sexual experience prompts, but apart from that, it's a solid A tier. Not bad for a game whose original installment received an F tier from me a while ago. If there's any game worth buying the pack for, it's this one. Wow, that was a long time talking about Fakin' It, huh? I must have been talking about it all night long. Okay. How about we move on to something else? How about something dirty? Dirty Drawful. It's Drawful but dirty. And honestly, that's where a lot of people would stop when describing the sequel, because structurally speaking, there isn't a whole lot different. But unlike what some people would say, there's a bit more here that I don't think people give enough attention. For all 2 of you that don't know how Drawful works, here's the gist. At the start of the game, everyone is tasked to draw a weird prompt to the best of their ability, usually a pretty spicy one at that. And normally you'd be playing without any eraser or undo button, but we'll get to that. Then, one by one, a player's drawing gets revealed and everyone else must do their best to write a convincing title for it. After this, all the players' submissions are shown on screen along with the real title given to the artist, and players must guess which answer was the actual title. Players earn 500 points for every one they fall, and 1,000 for correctly picking the actual title. The artist also earns 1,000 points for every player that guesses the actual title correctly. This goes on for every drawing players have created. Do it all again if you're playing with 6 players or less, and then a winner is declared. Okay, so that's Drawful's gameplay loop. We've seen this 4 separate times now. So what does this new installation bring to the table? Well, first off, rather than taking place in an indistinguishable void-like location, this Drawful takes place in a club bathroom. And oh my. She has thighs? I don't need this beta thighless owl anymore, there's a new sexy owl in town, hubba hubba. But don't worry, a new set of visuals isn't the only thing this new Drawful has going for it. Right off the bat, the biggest gameplay changes in this Drawful are an extra color slot reserved for white, which brings us to a total of 4 colors to use, and the addition of an undo button. Holy moly, I never thought I'd see the day. Drawful games have historically never had an undo button, and it's sort of been a running joke in the company, to the point where one wasn't even added to Drawful Animate, even though they absolutely had the technology to add one at the time. So to some, this change may be considered blasphemous, but holy moly does it make the drawing experience so much better, and this alone almost makes it the best version of Drawful purely from a gameplay perspective. Along with the extra color slot as well, this Drawful is easily the most intuitive for drawing. But if the idea of an undo button in your Drawful game just doesn't sit right with you for whatever reason, worry not, because there's a new setting that literally just turns the undo button off. A more overlooked new feature of this Drawful that I am personally a big fan of is the new prompt button. As implied, pressing this will generate a new prompt for you, but you only get to use this once per drawing phase. Normally I would be against a feature like this in a Drawful game, since I think working with what you got is, in a sense, part of the charm of a Drawful game. But I've personally found a lot of use in this button, as I quickly realized while playing this game that I know almost zero drug-related terminology, and a chance to re-roll for a better prompt is incredibly welcome if it means I don't have to open up an incognito tab and do a couple Google searches before I start drawing. Okay, so that's all the new features for the drawing phase, so what about the guessing phase? Well, the double down from Drawful Animate has returned. Use it once per round, and your reward for finding the actual title for that one drawing is doubled. Or your opponent's reward for fooling you in particular will be doubled instead. Not exactly a new feature in that regard, but it's the first time we've had a double down in a single frame Drawful, and I'm so glad it's here because it's one of my favorite additions from Animate. And now I can use it in a Drawful without a 3-minute drawing timer. During all parts of the writing and guessing phases, players can also use emotes to express how they feel about a drawing. But More often than not, these will just be spammed during the game to drown out the music with the emote sounds. Don't get me wrong, it's a fun addition with the right group, but if you're playing with people with zero restraint, or playing online, same diff, it can get irritating pretty fast with sound effects at full volume. At launch, there wasn't any way to turn the emotes off, so with the wrong groups, the emote spam could have been a drag to sit through, but now there's a setting to turn them off. I do personally think that emotes can add something to the game when used in moderation, but with groups that spam these, it can definitely be overkill. So I would personally turn emotes off for online games and turn them on when I'm playing with friends in person. And that's everything new that Dirty Drawful has to offer, and honestly, there isn't too much else to say about the base game. Even as a franchise that now has 4 major installments, the major Drawful formula has stayed relatively the same, apart from of course the animation gimmick in Drawful Animate. So the new accessibility features added to this version of Drawful pretty much automatically make this version the best base version of Drawful. So the major factor to your enjoyment of this Drawful in comparison to the others is really just gonna boil down to this one question. Do you like playing Drawful with spicier prompts? That's it really. Apart from some small accessibility features, the prompts are really the main difference that separates this Drawful from the others. So what do I think of the prompts? Well, yeah, they're alright. Considering the subject matter of the spin-off being naughty, there's still a good amount of variety in the prompt types, and it's still enough to keep you guessing at times. Even though there is an invisible content filter that makes sure that 50% of the prompts you see in-game are, quote, sexy, again, this game covers a lot of topics that are still rather absurd. A lot of prompts now will feature sex, drugs, and rock and roll, of course, but also non-naughty specific adult topics and profanity. So now in this game, you'll actually get rewarded for drawing penises and using profanity in your titles. However, you'll still need to think outside the box for this one, and that is the most important aspect of a Drawful prompt. One small thing I'd like to touch on, in previous Drawfuls, a handful of prompts would have special joke audio that would play after the actual title gets revealed, but in Dirty Drawful, there's none of that. It's not a huge deal, but there is a bit of charm that's been sacrificed due to this change. And another thing, I've heard people complain that having dirty prompts completely ruins this version of Drawful simply due to the fact that it removes some of the shock value that comes with drawing boobs and genitalia in your artwork. And to that, I say, obviously, so what? Here's the thing. Drawful isn't designed to be a comedy game in terms of its gameplay loop. You don't play Drawful to laugh, you play Drawful to draw and to deceive. The reason people laugh during a game of Drawful is because the prompts are unusual, and as a consequence they end up producing artwork and titles that simply wouldn't appear in many other environments. But the end goal isn't to make people laugh, it's to win. If you draw boobs and genitalia in a normal game of Drawful, yeah, it can be funny sometimes, but often it's actively hindering the artist from getting people to guess the actual title. Whereas in Dirty Drawful, sure, boobs and genitalia aren't as funny, you'll be expecting them after all, but in turn, in this version, those same boobs and genitalia will both be helping accurately portray the actual title and help the other players generate relevant decoys, which is what Drawful is all about. Besides, even if comedy isn't the main focus of Dirty Drawful, it still just as naturally produces laughs from the sheer absurdity of the drawings and decoys people submit, and there's no denying that.
Okay. What? Oh my god.
But anyways, the prompt diversity in this one is pretty good, but unfortunately for me, there's still a bit of a writing style present in the prompts that I've been able to catch on to. You see, I've played a lot of Drawful in my day, and not to brag, but I've gotten quite good at it, and my win rate in these games is pretty high. The only version of Drawful I don't consistently get in the top half of the leaderboard of is base Drawful Animate and UGC content, and of the 7 games of Dirty Drawful I have recorded on my computer, I came first place in 4 of them and second place in 2 of them, and the only people I have lost to are other hardcore Jackbox fans that know these games inside and out. Now, I'm not saying that I can't lose a single frame game of Drawful, but Drawful Animate still very easily takes the crown of having the most difficult prompt in a Drawful game. So if you're really good at Drawful games like me, then take that into consideration. But if you're just okay at it, this version will still get you to think differently when it comes to lying, and I can recommend it enough for that. In summary, Dirty Drawful is an engaging sequel that builds off of the additional little features introduced in Drawful Animate and brings the game back in a raunchy single-frame edition that expands on more accessible gameplay. There's a part of me that hates to say it, but this is the best Drawful game yet. At base. Yeah, there is one more pretty big thing I'd like to touch on, and to do that, let's open Drawful Animate. See, the very first thing you see when you open Drawful Animate is a menu screen with a total of 6 menu items, while in Dirty Drawful, the number of menu items has completely halved. Why is that? Well, this is because in Dirty Drawful, Friend Mode, Make Your Own, and the Featured Content tab have been completely removed. When I first heard about these changes, I was really disappointed that there wasn't even an attempt to bring these modes back, and I was ready to riot about it. But the more time I spent thinking about it, the more reasons there seemed to be for not adding these extra modes. Let's start off with Friend Mode. Sure, it's not the greatest thing in the world in terms of really shaking up the gameplay loop, but in my opinion, it's a great little bonus that can get you to just draw your fellow players doing stupid things. So why wouldn't we want this mode to return in Dirty Drawful? Well, it's in the name. Dirty Drawful is dirty. If base Dirty Drawful is filled with prompts about flicking the bean and giving birth while smoking a joint, then what's a friend mode for this version gonna look like? I mean, do you really want to draw your friends railing each other, let alone while in the same room as them? The more I think about it, the harder it becomes to imagine a reality where a friend mode for this game would still be raunchy, but somehow manages to escape any possibility of just being a little uncomfortable to interact with. Moving on to UGC, this absolutely could have been added back, and I would be praising Jackbox if they did, but again, the main gimmick of Dirty Drawful is that it's dirty. Adding UGC support would simply jeopardize the main reason Drawful has a naughty installation. Don't you think it would be a bit weird to boot up Dirty Drawful just to play exclusively with family-friendly prompts from a UGC episode? I mean, I'm not gonna lie, I would love to do that, but it sort of defeats the purpose of this Drawful sequel existing in the first place. Okay, so why don't we just use the Featured Content tab, just for naughty thematic content from Jackbox themselves? I think this could be a good solution if featured content wasn't already associated with UGC, otherwise it would just raise questions about why Make Your Own hasn't been added to Dirty Drawful. Overall, I completely understand why these extra modes have been removed, and it only becomes more clear the longer you think about it. But I'd be lying if I said I wasn't missing these extra modes. So what's the final verdict? Well, I'm gonna go back on what I said earlier, but this is simultaneously the best version of Drawful and the worst version of Drawful. It's the best because of all the new features in the drawing phase that make drawing so much more enjoyable in this version, the return of the double down, the addition of emotes, and the pacing is just a whole lot better. All of these make this version the best base Drawful experience. But on the other hand, aside from Drawful 1, this is the worst complete version of Drawful due to the complete removal of Friend Mode, the Make Your Own mode, as well as the Featured Content tab. And don't get me wrong, these are completely justified decisions, but it leaves you feeling like something's missing from the game now that there's only one play mode. So I'll leave you with this. If you aren't super hooked on the other Naughty Pack games and you just want a pack with a Drawful game, the most complete package is Drawful Animate and the Jackbox Party Pack 8. And the standalone Drawful 2 was also a pretty good buy if you're either not into the animation thing or you prefer to play in French, German, Spanish, and/or Italian. But if you're interested in the Jackbox Naughty Pack as a whole, or you prefer to play in Latin American Spanish or Brazilian Portuguese, then you won't be disappointed. Alright, 2 games down, 1 to go. We're almost there, so when it comes to my analysis on the Jackbox Naughty Pack, why don't you let me finish? Okay, let's just move on. Finishing off the Naughty Pack is the conveniently named Let Me Finish, the only completely original game of the pack. At launch, this game only used to have one mode, that being Debate Mode, with features specific to that mode that Jackbox Games made a rather big deal out of. But after the truckload of negative feedback that this game received, it got the most drastic update we'd seen from a party pack in history before, adding an entirely new mode to the game. Let Me Finish's gameplay in both modes revolves around answering vulgar questions about a selection of various images. Each picture and prompt will ask 2 players to go head-to-head to answer the question with a drawing, and as of the update they can add a caption to reinforce their point as well. Then all the remaining players vote on their favorites and points are awarded based on the percentage of players who vote for each response. Once everyone has battled in either 2 or 4 head-to-head matchups, the scores are tallied and a winner is declared. So that's what these game modes share in common, but the structure of the game is what changes drastically between modes. Quick Mode has everyone start off on a long content creation screen where players are tasked to create their drawings and captions for all of their matchups ahead of time. Then, one by one, each matchup reveals both responses automatically and the other players get right to voting immediately afterwards, allowing for each response to appear instantly with the utmost shock value. Quick Mode also features 1 image and prompt per game exclusive to Quick Mode, often leaning into the caption feature and the instantaneous method of revealing responses. Debate Mode, on the other hand, is far from quick. In this mode, there's no content creation screen at the start to get all the responses in. Instead, for each head-to-head matchup, everyone gets to draw their response after the prompt is revealed, not just the players going head-to-head. The main difference between the main matchup and the secondary one, however, is that head-to-head players get to use captions in their submissions while everyone else doesn't. Once that's done, the first player in the matchup gets their submission revealed and they get some time to speak aloud about their response, defending their argument. And if they want, they can use a laser pointer to draw temporary lines on the image to emphasize the presentation. And once they finish, the other head-to-head player does the same. Then everyone else votes on their favorite presentation and points are divvied out based on the votes. At this point, anyone else who wants to share their point of view can jump in for a smaller pool of bonus points, in much the same way the head-to-head players did. Then another vote goes round with every player this time. This whole cycle repeats until everyone's participated in at least 2 or 4 head-to-head matchups and then a winner is declared. Before I get into my main thoughts on this game, I'd like to take a minute to iterate just how much the update changed my perspective on this game and how much of my review for this game in particular I've had to rewrite. On launch, this game left a lot to be desired. There was only one mode, it was long, and the prompts were all over the place. People didn't enjoy the jump-in system, they were getting tired of the prompts really quickly, and people got drained at the mere thought of the game. When I first wrote this review, I started off defending this game a lot less fairly simply just because I like presentation games, but after that, I only really had negative things to say about it. And no joke, the update took so many of my concerns and provided almost the best solution for all of them. I didn't like how the jump-in was handled and I wanted to propose a way to turn them off. Boom, an entirely new mode without the jump-in feature. Comedy was hard to pull off when presenting because it was hard to elongate the answer to a relatively simple question. Boom, captions were added and the all-new game mode reveals your submissions quickly to deliver your answers with way more shock value, providing way more laughs. I wrote an entire section of this review pitching new prompt types that would aim to diversify the content pool. Hell, I requested that nice prompts should be made more common and I could realistically see the company doing that. And in the update, they went out of their way to create a new setting that not only allows you to make them more common, but less common as well. You can now tailor the content of this game to be as tame or as raunchy as you want, and that single-handedly solved a lot of my issues with the content system. Not only do I have reasons to bring positive discussion to this game now, I've had to restructure so much of this review to accommodate discussion on the new mode and to reword things that more accurately reflect what the game is now. And I felt that it was necessary to spread the word about these changes because this game has truly changed. And because of that, I don't want people who are wanting to be informed about this pack to only be looking at the popular reviews that came out on launch, because this game has changed a lot. And it simply wouldn't be fair to base all of your thoughts on Let Me Finish on reviews with a lot of aspects that have since become outdated. Jackbox has done so much to update the Jackbox Naughty Pack and Let Me Finish in particular, and it is the most listened to I've ever felt as a consumer of these games in over 4 years of me taking interest in the franchise. So in short, this game has changed a lot to listen to player feedback, and as such my personal thoughts have changed a lot, and I have the need to inform you all. So if you've only seen reviews of this game at launch, allow me to shine a new light onto your perspective of Let Me Finish. Now, because of how much adding a new mode completely changes the game, I'll first go over my thoughts on quick mode and debate mode as separate products, and then talk about Let Me Finish as a whole afterwards. Because the update has changed a lot about my perspective on the game, and I don't think it would be fair to package the individual modes as the same experiences, because they play out rather differently. So without further ado, let's talk about quick mode. Holy moly, this is such an upgrade from debate mode at launch. Quick mode is a very simple concept. You'll see 2 or 4 prompts on your device. Answer them any way you want. Each answer will go up against someone else's answer and everyone will vote on which they like. Yeah, it's another Quiplash clone. We've seen a few of these now. There you go, guys. There's the naughty Quiplash you were asking for. Are you happy now, Steam reviewers? But hey, the reason we see Quiplash clones is because the formula simply works. It wastes no time, it gets the point across, it's 100% fair, and it creates a working space for comedy. In fact, this is probably the closest game we have to a concept as simple as Quiplash but with drawings. The next closest thing would probably be Champed Up, but there are layers of strategy in that game that aren't present in the Quiplash formula. Anyways, back to quick mode. Each response is allowed a drawing and a caption up to 30 characters. When the responses eventually get presented, they show off the drawing for one response first for around a second, then show the caption afterwards, then do the same for the other response. And for what it's worth, I think it's handled fairly well here. It strikes a pretty decent balance between having enough time to process the whole response, while not lasting long enough to feel downright uncomfortable, which is what you want when you're answering a question with both a drawing and a caption. Quick mode specifically is just handled in a really simple yet effective way, which absolutely has been done to death, but it's a formula that simply works. Because for a game where a lot of the unhinged raunchiness comes from the game prompt already, quick mode provides one crucial thing to player submissions that debate mode was sorely lacking, and that one thing is shock value. Back when Let Me Finish only had debate mode, I enjoyed presenting my submissions with my voice of course, but the more games I played, the more I started to notice that I was laughing more at the prompts than the actual presentations themselves, which is not something you want when you're trying to make a party game that's designed to promote intimate yet goofy discussion. And I believe that comes from the fact that many of these questions don't really need an essay to answer according to your thoughts at the time, and with that in mind, it felt like time was regularly being wasted there, but in quick mode there isn't any of that. Once the prompt comes up and you laugh at the prompt, each submission comes up in their entirety and they explain themselves, regularly shocking the other players, which is exactly what you want to create comedy. Shock value. And I am beyond glad Jackbox went out of their way to create an all-new mode for this game simply to give it the shock value it's been missing. Seriously, adding an entirely new mode purely because of player feedback is nothing short of commendable. Thank you, Jackbox. So debate mode has a few features unique to it, which we'll get to, but what exclusive features do quick mode have to offer? Well, unique to this mode is a whole new batch of quick mode specific content called caption images. Unlike the base content, caption content only has one prompt per image, and they only appear once per game in quick mode. Typically, these prompts really take advantage of the new captioning feature and the quick mode head-to-head system to deliver new kinds of prompts that wouldn't normally work in a debate mode setting. And personally, these are my favorite kinds of prompts I've seen from this game. Rather than asking for the usual anatomy question or personality question, these give us much more of a scenario to work with and build off of, and I love it for that. Another thing that's great about this mode really shouldn't be a surprise, but the name Quick Mode is no joke. The longest recording I have of one game of Quick Mode is just over 9 minutes, and one of those minutes is entirely dedicated to the tutorial, which you can turn off, mind you. It honestly amazes me just how quickly this game goes by, struggling to reach 10 minutes per game, with speed along the likes of something like Zeepeldome or Dictionarium. In fact, it might just enter my regular roster of games to play when the group has 10 minutes to kill. And because it ends rather abruptly and is rather unstructured, it leaves you wanting more, and in a roundabout way, it's become one of the few games that I'd go multiple games on with same players. I did that once for footage with a couple of my closer online friends. It was midnight and we were all kinda half asleep and we were just having the time of our lives. We went through 5 games in a row, and in total we only ended up playing for around 40 minutes, or about the length of one game of Roomerang with an AFK player. Now, before I move on to debate mode, I'd like to make mention of one more interaction that I thought was worth pointing out, and that is the content creation timer. Oh, and before we get to that, can we just take a moment to appreciate the music in this section? I'm sad that it's not on the official OST because it is fire. Just listen. Anyways, back to the timer. You see, when the content creation phase begins, everyone's given the same amount of time to finish their content. On normal timers it lasts 180 seconds / 3 minutes, and on extended timers it lasts 240 seconds / 4 minutes. Now in games with 5 or more players, you only have 2 submissions to complete, meaning you should generally be budgeting 1.5 minutes per prompt on normal timers and 2 minutes per prompt on extended timers. Overall, these timer lengths are really generous, maybe even too generous, but unfortunately this is in stark contrast to the time you have in 3 and 4 player games, because those player counts require you to create 4 submissions, yet the timer remains the same. Meaning for 3 and 4 player games, on average you really only have 45 seconds per submission on normal timers and only a minute on extended timers, because you're tasked to create double the content in the same amount of time. The normal timers in particular are quite harsh, and this is coming from the same company that once gave you 90 seconds to choose a single button to press. I'm normally playing this pack with lower player counts anyways, and I don't normally do this for most Jackbox games, but I keep extended timers on for this one, and even then it's hard for us to get all our submissions in on time. In short, lower player counts have to create double the content in the same amount of time as the other counts. High player count timers are quite long, low player count timers aren't long enough, and there needs to be a system in place that adjusts the timer length here based on the number of required submissions. But otherwise, that's my only main quick mode specific complaint. But to be completely honest, I'm fine with having only 1 minute per submission. 45 seconds at base is way too harsh though. And that's everything I have to say about quick mode. In short, this mode is a really quick quiplash style drawing game that brings shock value back to the concept and makes it work. Now let's switch gears and talk about debate mode for a minute. Unfortunately for debate mode, as much as I want to say that there's a multitude of objective reasons that this mode is good, most of my enjoyment of debate mode simply comes from the fact that I like presentation games, and by its design it allows me to present more often than most other Jackbox presentation games. And if you surround yourself with socially confident people in this mode, it can be pretty engaging. But as much as I would like to recommend this mode purely for that, it's a baseless point. There's not a lot I can really say about debate mode being fun purely because presenting is fun, because that is entirely an opinion-based thing. And I don't know if you've noticed, but for the other games I've covered, I've used objective facts about the game's inner workings to back up my points, to make my thoughts as informed as possible, and to encourage you to think about the game in a different light with newfound objective information, even if your opinions are totally opposite from mine. But I can't do that with "I get to present a lot, therefore I find it fun," because that statement is entirely subjective. So here's the pitch. If you tend to play Jackbox with people you're either super comfortable with or who are just generally confident, and you don't easily get tired out with an oversaturation of inconsequential sexually based opinions, I will just recommend debate mode to you right here and now. If you don't, or you just want to be informed of some of my objective thoughts, then buckle up. At launch, when debate mode was the only mode, this game seemed to be the majority's least favorite Naughty Pack game by a landslide, and it's where a lot of people tended to point when critiquing the pack as a whole, putting the other games under its umbrella. And unfortunately, as much as I've been defending this pack until now, this is the part where I'm gonna have to start agreeing with the majority here. Don't get me wrong, I've definitely had fun with this mode, and I'm a sucker for presentation games in general, but I'm not gonna pretend that this mode is perfect. And it really just comes down to one major critique, which unfortunately is the mode's main selling point. Introducing the jump-in feature. At any point during a main debate contest in debate mode, players that aren't the main presenters can raise their hand to jump in during the presentation. And once the main contest finishes, a secondary contest will begin with each of the players that decided to jump in, with a smaller point pool dependent on the number of players that jumped in. On paper, this is an addition I love playing with in a standard game. After all, you get to display your own take on any argument in the game and get some bonus points for it. And I will admit, it can be fun to watch everyone's take on an issue. When they're all unique, that is. But the main problem I have with its implementation is that there isn't any incentive not to jump in. Because there's no consequence for either abstaining from jumping in or not gaining a reaction after jumping in, this feature doesn't provide any reason to abstain from it. If you jump in, you have the chance to receive extra bonus points with nothing to lose. If you don't, you have nothing to gain or lose. So why would you not jump in every argument? Personally, I jump in almost all the time simply just because I love to present. The only times I don't jump in are when I feel that my argument is going to end up saying almost the exact same thing as another player and I can't up the humor of it. And while it can be fun, it's not uncommon to get a prompt where everyone's sort of forced into giving the same perspectives. And when that happens, you start to notice the drag when everyone decides to jump in. And that's the main reason I have this critique. The lack of consequence for jumping in starts to make the game less enjoyable when you have to sit through the same arguments multiple times from different people. Now, you could make the argument that the game is about the presentations and not the scores, like a role models type situation. But if that's the case, why is the jump in advertised as a means to get bonus points, and why do you get to see the scores of every player on your controller whenever you want? Like, I'm telling you, I think that controller scoreboard feature alone does enough to give the impression to players that this is a competitive game instead of something that should be treated more casually. And be honest, you know there's going to be one person in your group that's going to be basing their votes on the scoreboard in an attempt to get ahead themselves. One consequence I'd like to propose for the jump-in is a point deduction if you don't receive any votes after a jump-in. This way, it still incentivizes the other players to present their idea if they have faith in it, but would consider turning against the idea or pulling out if someone else already said something similar or just straight up better. And another thing about the jump in, why is it even allowed to follow through when only one player decides to jump in and then they just get handed 250 points for free? I don't know, this whole jump in thing is an idea I love on paper, but in practice it could really do with a rework to feel as substantial as it should be. And another thing on debate mode, while the laser pointer can do a lot of heavy lifting, I still feel like the presentation aspect of this mode is a little hindered by a general lack of control. And to illustrate what I mean by this, I'm going to make a few comparisons to another presentation game, Junktopia. I like Junktopia more than the average Joe, and I would dare say that it's an underrated game, especially in real life. But one thing that's always bothered me about the presentation tools in that game is that you cannot control when the antique is revealed. It will always happen as soon as you press the I will present button on your controller. If you wanted to deliver some monologue beforehand, too bad, deal with it. Thankfully, you still have full control of when you reveal the next piece of information in line, but you still have to follow an unchanging structure. And what does this have to do with Let Me Finish? Well, to an extent, I believe that Let Me Finish debate mode suffers from the same kind of issue. You don't get to choose when your drawing shows up, or your caption, you just let the game do it for you. Obviously, this isn't an issue for quick mode because you don't have a presentation to worry about there. But in debate mode, I feel like being able to time your drawing and the caption specifically would elevate the presentation experience. Maybe it would be too clunky to have alongside the laser pointer on the controller, maybe it wouldn't work well with jump-ins, but it might be something worth looking into at least. Because sometimes it can be pretty hard to elevate your submission with a presentation if your drawing and caption already do most of the talking. And especially with a game with prompts like this, feeling that struggle across multiple people who jumped into the same prompt can be a bit of a drag. Oh, and speaking of drag, on average, a game of debate mode I have with my friends takes over 3 times as long as quick mode. I get that quick mode is meant to be quick, but for debate mode to take up nearly half an hour when the quick mode struggles to even reach 10 minutes is honestly such a massive contrast I can't even describe. Another thing on the laser pointer, it's pretty laggy. You get some pretty jagged lines when trying to quickly draw a circle with it. And this would be because your laser pointer drawing data is calculated in real time as you're drawing the line. In other games like Talking Points or Civic Doodle, while it would seem like the drawing is happening in real time, the game actually waits until the player finishes drawing a line before animating it on the main screen. Let Me Finish's laser pointer, however, that's actually done in real time, and as a result, it's not as smooth as you'd like. Not a biggie, it still does its job well enough, but I felt it was worth pointing out. Okay, I'll stop. And that's all my thoughts on the debate mode specific stuff. I know, I was a bit of a downer back there, so let's move on and talk about the game as a whole, starting with a much smaller thing that got added in the update, the max effort tiebreaker. If 2 or more players are tied by the end of the game, one of them is given a max effort bonus of 69 points to be declared the winner. And surprise surprise, the tiebreaker is not random or based on player indexes. Instead, it will randomly decide on one of 2 criteria. Either whoever drew the most points in all of their drawings, or who used the most characters in all of their captions. It's a pretty cool system that feels more fair than most other Jackbox tiebreakers. That being said, don't use it as an excuse to make all of your submissions look like this. Anyways, back to something more impactful. This next talking point was a much more prevalent critique that used to be quite major until the update, the prompts. I know, I really hate to say that one of the bigger critiques with a game like this is the prompts, an entirely subjective part of the game in terms of enjoyment. But my main issue with the prompts in this game isn't necessarily that I don't enjoy them, or that they're too disgusting or juvenile or anything, even though a few prompts in this game could fit a couple of those complaints. No, my main problem with the prompts in this game is this. There simply isn't a whole lot of variety. At launch, it was a lot more insufferable, but the update has helped to mitigate the issue a bit. That being said, it's still noticeable to point out and may cause you to think about the game differently. So to illustrate, allow me to explain the quirks of Jackbox's content engine specific to Let Me Finish. Each image in the game can have up to 3 prompts, typically one for each level of naughtiness a prompt can have: nice, naughty, and nasty. Nice is typically more basic or tame, while naughty is a lot more sexual or adult, and nasty is typically more adventurously sexual or gross out in nature. However, there are multiple exceptions to all of these categories, so take this grading with not just a grain of salt, but an entire teaspoon. This next point mostly comes from the restriction of the Naughty Pack in general, but it mostly just harms Let Me Finish in particular out of the fact that it's specifically designed to be a comedy game. Since this pack is meant to cater to a more mature audience, standard jokes you would normally expect from a Jackbox game are a lot less common in order to cater to the mature side. But at the same time, in this current climate, you can't really sell a commercial product that endorses dark humor that is based in tragedy and sensitive topics, like politics or 9/11 for example. The compromise here is that the Naughty Pack games tend to over-rely on sex and drugs, which isn't necessarily a bad thing for Fakin It All Night Long and Dirty Drawful, but in Let Me Finish, the lack of variety makes the comedy aspect run dry faster than you'd hope, and patterns start to emerge. On launch, this was much more of an issue, but now with more unique prompts and the new content level setting, it's a bit more manageable now. And speaking of this content level setting, how does it work? Well, I hate to be the informer of bad news, but unfortunately it works in the exact same way it works in Fakin It All Night Long. Nice prompts can only be rolled on the less naughty content level, naughty prompts can only be rolled on normal, and nasty can only be rolled on nasty. But believe it or not, this took me a long time to figure out. The only reason I did figure it out was because I was constantly reviewing my own footage of this game, and it disproved my theories on its inner workings. But why am I telling you this anyways? Well, it's because I believe that while the content levels implementation in Fakin It ANL feels quite intentional when looking at the code, the way it works in Let Me Finish seems to be the result of a bug. For context, Let Me Finish uses game skeletons based on the number of players and the mode you're currently playing to determine different kinds of details of the structure of the game, including the amount of content you'll see in the game, the order of image types, and even a points multiplier, which is always set to 1, but still. The thing is though, levels of prompt naughtiness were also determined by the skeleton, and are effectively the main reason these skeletons even exist in the first place. On launch, there was only one skeleton per player count, but prompt naughtiness changed frequently. On average, there would be around 50% naughty prompts and 50% nasty prompts, and one of the more interesting features of these skeletons was that they would be different on your first game with same players. Your first game would always feature exactly one nice prompt, but every game in a row beyond that wouldn't. But now that the update is out, it doesn't matter how many players you have or what mode you play, prompt naughtiness will always remain at one static value depending on your content level setting. But while the prompt naughtiness is static now, the rest of the game skeleton works perfectly, which is precisely why I think this is a bug. I had previously written, recorded, and even edited an old version of this segment with how I thought the setting worked, and praised it for its innovation in comparison to Fakin It All Night Long. Part of that segment even involved me talking about how I wish there was a way to force exclusively nice prompts, and I had footage of me running a modded game skeleton as a test to prove a point. Well, it turns out I don't need to prove that point anymore, because it turns out that I've been playing exclusively with nice prompts every time I set my content level to less naughty, and so have you. And now that I know it works in the exact way that I've already critiqued, I don't even know what to say about it anymore. My leading theory for this bug has to do with the global current level variable. This variable changes to the next naughtiness level in a skeleton when another variable by the name of current reveal index increases in value just as the current image for submissions shrinks out of existence. I can't confirm anything for certain here, but on launch it would have been safe to assume that content was generated as the game progressed and increased its current reveal index, because naughtiness levels would follow the order of the game skeleton and, you know, actually work as intended. But in the update, now all the content and subsequently the prompts are generated ahead of time, likely to be more compatible with the addition of quick mode. And because of that, prompt naughtiness will never change over the span of one game, because the system that's responsible for diversifying the prompt naughtiness is entirely dependent on a variable that will never change its value until minutes after all of the content is generated, making the first naughtiness listed in the skeleton decide the naughtiness of every prompt in the game. And because the rest of the code surrounding this system is fairly competent, I am confident when I say that this functionality is probably not intended. And it's a shame too. I had a lot of positive things to say about the unbugged functionality, even if none of us ever actually experienced it since the update. Such is the burden of knowledge. We could have eaten from the tree of life, but here we are. Oh well. I should mention that, apart from this bug, this is still an alright setting, but man, this discovery just threw a spanner in the works. Again. I might put an old edit of what this segment would have been if I hadn't discovered this bug somewhere on this video as a card or a link or something. The hope is that this old segment becomes relevant at a later date, but yeah, this was rough, having to redo this entire segment in post-production. I'm telling you, I never stop learning about these games. Let's just move on. Transitioning to the original recorded script in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, I know I've spent a lot of time talking about the prompts, which again is an incredibly subjective part of the game, but I would like to touch on one more thing related to the content engine that really harmed a lot of people's first impressions, including mine. Introducing the starter content filter, aka the invisible content engine functionality that some first-time players confuse for a broken content filter. Here's how it works. A few select images in the game have a toggle to mark it as starter content. When the game tries to generate content, it takes these toggles, along with other content filters, into consideration. If you've already played 3 or more games of Let Me Finish, the game will be allowed to roll any content in the game that still applies to the other content filters. However, if you've played any less than that, the game will only give you content that is tagged as starter content. Like the jump-in feature, this is an idea that is great on paper, but in execution it falls flat on its face, more dramatically so than the jump-in feature. The main problem that the starter content system has is that not only is there not not enough starter content to make the first 3 games of Let Me Finish feel like they have enough variety across different devices, the amount of starter content for some of the prompt types only barely reaches what I would consider the minimum quota that this game absolutely needed to reach. Let's think about this logically. The highest number of times you'll see each main image type per game, which you can achieve by either playing a 4-player or 8-player game of Let Me Finish debate mode, is 4 each. 4 for lineup, 4 for wearers. And as we established just earlier, the starter content filter affects your first 3 games of Let Me Finish, meaning that the minimum number of images for each of these types that have to be labeled as starter content to make sure that you can't make repeating starter content a guarantee is the product of these two numbers, 12. 12 images for each of the main image types. Now, the amount of starter content for wearers images is 17 currently, but equal to 12 on launch, just barely reaching the minimum quota, which even then doesn't guarantee that you won't repeat these starter images within your first 3 games. But that's not all. You want to know how many starter lineup images there are? As of the update, 12, which is the bare minimum, but on launch, 10! That doesn't even reach the minimum quota! And because lineup images always go first in this game and then alternate, if you are playing this game exclusively with player counts of 4, 7, and 8, on launch you are quite literally guaranteed to see at least 2 repeat images within your first 3 games. But that's only the guaranteed repeats. There's still the chance that content will repeat more than that anyways, since the content engine takes advantage of splicing. I ran a test where I wiped my save data to start from 0 played games, and I played 3 4-player games of debate mode in a row, once on the launch version and once on the updated version. On the launch version, I got 3 repeat images, and on the update, I still got 2 repeats. But at least the launch version gave you a chance to get a different prompt if an image repeated, but now that the prompt generation system is bugged, if you don't change your content level setting at all during your first 3 games, if you see a repeat image, then seeing a repeat prompt as well is 100% guaranteed. Why would you add a filter like this and not even reach the minimum quota to remove the guarantee to see content repeating within the span of the first 3 games, the games that are the most important to leaving a lasting first impression? Due to the poor handling of the starter content system, it made a lot of the first launch day streams and early access streams of this game feel more similar than they had any right to be, and it made a lot of people skeptical and outright worried about the game's launch. Personally, I was worried that there would only be a total of like 30 images in the entire game, and because of this, my first impressions of this game were tainted up until the official release. Hell, some people think that the entire content system has been tampered with because of this blunder, even raising concern from Jackbox reviewer and YouTuber Silacork, and honestly, I don't blame him. I mean, wouldn't you be concerned if you got the exact same prompt 2 games apart? Ignoring Jokeboat? I sure was before I learnt about this system. Again, the starter content filter is an idea I love on paper, but the execution is so poorly done that it makes everyone's first experiences with this game look nearly identical. I got tired of seeing these pencils, I got tired of seeing this weird submarine, and I got tired of seeing these birds and their weird wax obsession. And if even after all that, you still don't think this is an issue, I've put an online bingo card in the description. Search up a collection of early access / launch day streams of the Naughty Pack and see how quickly you can get a bingo or fill up the entire card. And before we wrap up on Let Me Finish, there's just one more bit of concern I'd like to raise, which doesn't exactly have anything to do with the game itself, but more so the way it's currently marketed. I never thought I'd be saying the following phrase on my channel, let alone when reviewing a Jackbox game, but I'd like to talk about identity politics. Wait, hold on, I mean as a product, as a video game! So what do I mean by this? In short, I want to bring up a conflict of interest when it comes to how the game presents itself on the menu screen and how it's advertised as part of the Jackbox Naughty Pack. Let's start off with a quick timeline. 12th of September, the Jackbox Naughty Pack released. Let Me Finish was advertised as a presentation/debate game, and players received a presentation/debate game. But unfortunately for Jackbox, the general public didn't like this presentation/debate game. So in the 23rd of November, in their most empathetic update to a Jackbox game in probably ever, they created an all-new mode for the game that follows a more Quiplash-style approach to game structure, labeled Quick Mode, which is now the new face of Let Me Finish on the menu screen, the new mode to be, if you will. After all, it is the first thing you see on the menu screen, so is quick mode not the true let me finish experience now? According to the game itself, it is, but according to every other source outside of the game, it isn't. The Steam page, the game page on Jackbox's official website, and the Jackbox Mega Picker all describe Let Me Finish as Jackbox's newest presentation game verbatim. So everything outside of the actual game is telling you that Let Me Finish is a presentation game where everyone gets a chance to speak their mind. Meanwhile, the very first thing you see when you open the actual game is a mode description that reads faster gameplay, no talking required. No talking required? Was I not just advertised a presentation game where I have a chance to speak my mind? So why does the first thing I see have nothing to do with speaking? Should I have been advertised something different instead? I don't have a problem with either mode being called the definitive mode, but when there seems to be a direct conflict of interest between the game itself and what the game is advertised to be, that is the problem I have. Obviously the game still has the speaking mode, so it's not a direct scam or anything, but it just leaves me wondering what the game actually wants to be. Is it the Quiplash style head-to-head drawing game that the fans wanted, or is it the original presentation/debate game that was specifically designed for the Jackbox Naughty Pack? It can be one or the other, or it can be both, but when there's a conflict of interest, then what's a first-time buyer gonna think? I'm likely reading way further into this than any other sane man, and it's not a big deal for those of us that saw the update get announced and everything, but I wanted to talk about this because I feel that this choice alone could leave a lasting first impression to a new customer. Okay, so with all of that extensive discussion about Let Me Finish done that no other man would dare spend this much time on, what's my final verdict? Honestly, despite all my complaining, it's still like a B tier as a full product. Quick mode is fantastic, and debate mode is also there. I still have a good time with debate mode even if it's not handled super well, and the new content level setting can really change how you approach some of the content here. But if there's anything I want to make clear about my experience with this game, particularly with debate mode, you might want to treat it like a spice. Yes, this game can be a lot of fun with the right people, but because of the repetitive nature of some of the prompts, it can start to drain if you're not in the right mood. But in moderation and with the right group of people, it's a pretty good time. That being said, despite my recommendation for this game, don't overdo this one, because you could run the comedy well pretty dry on this one rather quickly if you're not careful. And oh my gosh, that's all of the Naughty Pack games. I was there for a really long time. But now that you know my thoughts on the games themselves, I'd like to point out a few more facts and thoughts about the pack as a whole. Normally, this is the part where 50% of Naughty Pack video reviewers also review the Jackbox Mega Picker for some reason, but I won't be doing that because that's not why you clicked on this video. So for now, let's go over some objective things about the pack that I think are worth bringing up. Firstly, it should be pretty obvious, but there's no formal family-friendly toggle in this pack. Yes, there are the content level settings in Fakin It All Night Long and Let Me Finish, but there's nothing that will actively get rid of all the raunchy stuff. I mean, the pack is M-rated anyway, so it obviously wasn't built with family-friendly in mind. I mean, what would a family-friendly toggle even do in this game? Turn it into a Helen Keller simulator? That being said, I still think it's pretty funny that the moderation settings and profanity filter settings are still very much supported. By default, the profanity filter setting is only set to filter out slurs, which I would default it to anyway, but putting it to strict filters any player input involving profanity and would genuinely harm your gameplay with any of the games here, but especially Dirty Drawful in particular. So keep it at moderate or off if you can. After all, it's the Naughty Pack, why be extra restrictive? Secondly, unlike almost every other Jackbox game since Drawful 2, excluding Espionage and, funnily enough, the original Fakin It, this pack doesn't generate any unique shareables for your games of any real value. At the end of each game, Fakin It All Night Long has 2 images you can share, Dirty Drawful has 1 of 3 depending on how you performed in the game, and Let Me Finish has 1 of 3 random similar images. But none of these artifacts show you anything you submitted from the game, not even a final scoreboard image or anything. So if you want to share your terrible drawings or your devious plays in Fakin It All Night Long, you'll have to resort to screenshots and game recordings, which for a lot of people isn't always ideal. The Jackbox Naughty Pack was also created for a very specific purpose. It's no secret that you can have naughty games of Jackbox simply by writing freaky answers in Quiplash or whatever, and there are some adult prompts throughout the entire franchise, but the purpose of this pack in particular is to encourage discussion about adult topics in games that wouldn't normally be able to offer that same opportunity from user-generated content alone. Fakin It All Night Long has you answering questions about your sexual preferences, opinions, and experiences. Dirty Drawful has you drawing absurdist crude artworks and guessing what degenerate text inspired the drawing. And Let Me Finish tasks you to defend arguments about the anatomy and Freudian personality traits of everyday objects. The only game here that encourages people to lean specifically into adult comedy is Let Me Finish, while the other two games are still just as much about deception and discussion as their original counterparts, except with a naughty coat of paint that can bring intimate discussion to life, which is exactly what the Naughty Pack is about: intimate discussion. But with this very specific purpose, it does limit the appeal of the pack as a whole more drastically than a standard party pack. Not only does this pack have a more narrow target audience because of its content rating, it's also narrowed simply due to the kind of intimate discussion it's aiming to create. Fakin It All Night Long assumes you'll be playing with people you know well enough to properly interrogate and are comfortable enough with sharing their opinions and experiences related to adult encounters, so playing this game with shy people and internet strangers is generally discouraged. And debate mode for Let Me Finish assumes that everyone playing is not only comfortable with each other, but is also confident enough to make multiple presentations and deliver an argument, many of which will be focusing on absurdist sexual topics. Dirty Drawful and Let Me Finish Quick Mode are the only games in this pack that don't require a level of confidence and intimacy with your fellow players, so keep that in mind when asking yourself if you want to buy this pack, especially considering this last thing, the price. At launch, this pack was $21.69 USD, but was quickly lowered to $20 USD after the truckload of negative reviews on Steam. This is around the same price as the other pack with exactly 3 games, the Jackbox Party Starter, so the price per game ratio here is less efficient than the standard party pack. So if this pack sounds like something you'd be interested in picking up, really ask yourself how much you want a naughty Jackbox experience that focuses more on adult discussion, because that will be the main deciding factor. As for me, I enjoy this pack a fair amount, but it's not something I'd play every time I want to play Jackbox. Fakin It All Night Long finally brings me a Fakin It experience that doesn't either terrify me or feel clunky and pointless, so I'm just really enjoying the opportunity to actually have fun playing this game. Dirty Drawful is Drawful but dirty, and Drawful has always been fun, and finally having an undo button really does change the game for me. And Let Me Finish is an interesting game which plays with drawings in a unique way. It can be pretty hilarious, but particularly with debate mode, it needs to be played in moderation. So would I recommend this pack? Yes. Asterisk. Buy it on sale, I'd say, because $20 USD is a bit of a steep price for a pack with such a restrictive target appeal. But it is worth picking up eventually for a version of Fakin It that leaves the original in the dust, and a Drawful game that has an undo button. Let Me Finish is just something you'll have to try out for yourself to really feel if you'll be into. Now, how does this pack fare against the others? Well, having only 3 games is a bit of a disadvantage. I'd rather open it over packs 1, 4, 5, or 10 if we're talking about the packs from an exclusive standpoint, and of course from a casual gameplay perspective. I mod packs 1 and 10 all the time, and out of all the current packs, pack 3 is the one I have the least playtime in, despite it being widely considered one of the best ones. But I will admit, it is hard for this pack to stand on its own when the ideal playstyle is super narrow. So if you have a group of friends that you're super close with, super comfortable around, super confident with, and super cool with talking about sex stuff with, I'd say that this is a fantastic pack to pick up. But if you fall short in a couple of these areas, or you mainly play these games with strangers on the internet, then there's a good chance that this pack might not be for you. So to wrap things up, this pack's sequels do a great job expanding on their original counterparts, and Let Me Finish is a game that can be enjoyable on debate mode, but quick mode is the clear winner for consistent enjoyment. If you want to pick this one up, maybe wait for a sale and ask yourself if a Jackbox game night centered around intimate discussion with your fellow players is really something you want. Oh, and one more thing, if you already own the pack, leave a review. The Jackbox Naughty Pack currently has a 29% review score on Steam, lower than You Don't Know Jack Volume 6 The Lost Gold, a game owned by Jackbox that literally doesn't even open. The fact that this pack has a lower review score than another game by the same developers that literally doesn't open is a genuinely impressive feat. So where am I going with this? My invitation to you is this: leave a critical review on the game, going extremely in depth with your thoughts. Does it have to be negative? No. Does it have to be positive? Also no. The point is to be constructive. This game has gotten a lot of negative backlash, and because they've already made major changes to the entire pack, and doubly so for Let Me Finish in particular based on the reviews, it means that they're listening to the reviews of this game. And this Naughty Pack update made me feel the most listened to as a consumer of these games since I've ever been a fan of Jackbox. So if we do our best to be detailed about what we think works with the pack, what doesn't, and what could improve, it'll create a pool of constructive criticism that will likely be seen and could possibly influence how Jackbox will approach future projects. But I cannot stress this enough, be constructive. We want Jackbox to thrive, not wallow in shame. So give this pack another chance and let your thoughts be heard. Oh, by the way, how do you feel about this pack? What are your thoughts on each game? Did I teach you something new about these games? Did I change your opinion? Let me know in the comments below. But I'm gonna call it there. I've spent an ungodly amount of time talking about this pack, and I think it's time I leave you be now. Thank you all for watching, everyone. I'll just be off to atone for my sins now. I desperately need to cleanse my spirit after all that. See ya.
Yay, we've all finished together, and that's all.
Oh my gosh, remind me not to review an entire party pack in one video again, because holy moly, that took a long time. And that was only a 3-game pack. Could you even imagine how long I'd spend on a video reviewing pack 10? With all that out of the way, the Naughty Pack isn't a pack I'll be playing a whole lot from this point on, religious virgin and all, but I'd dare say that I'm a Naughty Pack advocate. I even have the shirt with the pack's logo on it. How did I pay for it? Funny I mentioned that, Jackbox themselves paid me for a bug report. For context, there used to be a bug with the new content widgets in this pack that would result in the game refusing to get past the start screen from February 1st onwards, so I wrote a very detailed bug report to them, and I even offered them a programmatical solution of my own. And they were so thankful that they gave me $60 worth of Jackbox gift cards, and when they released the bug fix, they used my exact solution in the code line for line, meaning that my code is technically in the Jackbox Naughty Pack, and I technically got paid for bug fixing. Safe to say this will not be something I'll shut up about for a while. Oh, and speaking of fixes, I've put up a couple mods for the Jackbox Naughty Pack on my GitHub. These aim to fix the problems with the content level settings in Fakin It All Night Long and Let Me Finish and make them more customizable. And I've also raised the max player count in Dirty Drawful from 8 to 10 players. So if any of those things sound interesting to you, I'll put a link in the video or something. Also, we are very close to 1,000 subscribers. Thank you so much for all the support. If we can get to 1,000 subs by the end of May, I'll be able to monetize my videos. Wouldn't that be cool? Well, for me at least. But you know what to do. You've seen the subliminal messaging I've placed throughout the video. Subscribe, like, comment, and share, baby. Alright, that should be all from me. I'll see you on the flip side. See ya.